Welcome to the Bench Report, where we discuss important topics debated in the UK Parliament, holding your MPs accountable and making politics more accessible to all. Stick around as you might be listening while doing exactly what today's topic is all about.
Oh, interesting.
This deep dive is for you, and it's all about the debate in the UK Parliament concerning working from home in the public sector and its impact on productivity. We've got some fascinating insights for you today from discussions in the House of Lords on March 20th, 2025, and another session from October 23rd, 2024. These debates really highlight the different angles and worries being voiced at the highest levels of government.
Absolutely.
Our goal in this deep dive is to pull out the crucial arguments and questions surrounding public sector working from home and how it affects productivity. We want to give you a clear understanding of the complexities and the fact that this is still very much an ongoing conversation. So let's get into it.
Right from the start of both of these House of Lords discussions, there's a shared understanding on one key point. Public sector productivity is not where it was before the pandemic. We're looking at a 6.4% decrease.
Wow.
And the government representative stated quite clearly on both occasions that this is unacceptable. This immediately sets the stage for the debate.
It does, and this is where Lord Lunsborough really starts to press the issue, and you can hear a genuine concern in his questions. He keeps asking the government why they aren't conducting a full and proper assessment of how working from home is contributing to this productivity drop, especially since the increase in remote work seems to coincide with this decline. He makes a really important point that it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
A good point.
It makes you wonder, as someone potentially impacted by public services, why there isn't a more thorough investigation into this link.
That raises a fundamental question about the government's approach. Their response appears to be centered on what they termed a trust and learn strategy in March, alongside the introduction of a £100 million public sector reform and innovation fund. This fund, by the way, is intended to support new ways of working and potentially address some of the very productivity challenges being discussed. They also reference data from the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, the CIPD, suggesting that hybrid working levels around 60% are similar in the private sector. But they seem to be arguing that the public sector situation isn't unique.
But, as you might expect, Lord Lunsborough wasn't entirely convinced by that. Just pointing to similar numbers in the private sector doesn't necessarily tell us if it's actually working effectively in the very different context of the public sector.
Right.
He described an earlier statement from the business secretary, the one saying working from home creates a more productive, loyal workforce, as a sweeping statement lacking in hard evidence. That really highlights the differing ideas about what constitutes proof in this debate, doesn't it?
It does, and if we look at the bigger picture, this tension between broad claims and the demand for solid data is a recurring theme. In the October discussion, they brought up an IMF study that suggested a roughly flat impact on productivity from working from home.
Interesting.
What's interesting for you to consider is that this implies the positives of remote work, like less time spent commuting and a quieter workspace, might be balanced out by negatives, such as reduced opportunities for learning, innovation, and communication. So the initial thought that working from home would automatically boost output seems like an oversimplification.
Exactly. It's not just about where people are working, but really about how the work gets done and the environment that supports it. The discussions also touched on other potential downsides of remote work that might resonate with your own experiences or observations. Things like less social interaction among colleagues, potential effects on mental well-being, slower career progression, particularly for those just starting out, and perhaps a decrease in spontaneous creativity and innovation that can come from in-person collaboration.
However, it's also vital to remember the potential benefits of hybrid working that were brought up in these discussions. For example, it can allow for more focused work when needed, provide a better setting for tasks that require confidentiality, and crucially, as Baroness Thorne highlighted, it can have positive effects on who can participate in the workforce, particularly individuals with disabilities or significant childcare responsibilities. These are important factors to weigh in the balance.
So with all these different potential pluses and minuses, it leads to a really fundamental question. How do you even begin to accurately measure productivity in the public sector in this new landscape? Lord Sharbrant raised this exact point, and it's clearly a key challenge at the heart of this debate.
It is, and what's notable is the government's acknowledgments that measuring productivity in the public sector is much harder than it is in the private sector.
Right.
They offered examples like an increase in GP appointments and a reduction in hospital waiting lists as indicators of output. However, Lord Patel then brought in NHS England data from October 2024, which reported a significant 11% decline in productivity since before the pandemic, at a time when a considerable portion of NHS staff were working remotely. This really emphasizes the difficulty in finding clear and agreed-upon ways to assess performance.
That NHS figure is quite striking, and as someone who relies on those services, it likely raises concerns about the efficiency of care. But then the discussion introduced another important element, the role of management. Emerging research suggests that effective management practices can actually lead to increased productivity even when people are working remotely. That suggests it's not just about location, but about leadership and how teams are organized and supported, doesn't it?
Precisely. It's not simply a question of where people are situated, but the quality of leadership and the processes that are in place to facilitate effective work, regardless of location. And it's worth noting that the House of Lords Select Committee on Home-Based Working is actively investigating more sophisticated methods for measuring productivity, with their report expected in November of this year. So it's clear that the way we assess performance in this evolving work environment is still being developed.
Turning our attention to the actual government policy, it's been stated that civil servants are expected to work in the office for a minimum of 60% of their time.
Right.
This policy was established by the previous government and has been maintained by the current one. What's the main thinking behind this push for a significant office presence?
The government's rationale largely revolves around the importance of building what they call social capital.
Right.
Those in-person relationships and interactions that foster teamwork and a sense of camaraderie. Crucially, they also emphasize the value of in-person presence for the transfer of institutional knowledge, particularly to those who are newer to the public sector. Lord Brennan, during the March discussion, specifically highlighted the benefits of face-to-face interaction for mentoring and professional development.
But this policy doesn't seem to align with the experiences of all public sector workers. Baroness Finn mentioned a survey by the FDA union which represents senior civil servants, and it indicated that almost two-thirds of their members felt that the 3-day inter-office requirement actually decreased their productivity.
Interesting.
That's a pretty significant difference in perspective.
It really highlights a key tension. Are these mandated office days genuinely achieving their intended purpose of boosting collaboration and knowledge sharing? Or are they, as the union suggests, potentially hindering individual productivity in some cases?
Yeah.
Lord Wallace also raised an important point about training and skills development, expressing concern over the past sale of the National School of Government and the trend towards outsourcing training. There were calls to reinvest in internal training to ensure consistent professional development across the public sector.
And the government did acknowledge this need for ongoing development, stating their commitment to prioritizing the workforce through continued upskilling and training initiatives. They even mentioned considering a new type of civil service college through partnerships with universities. So there appears to be an understanding that simply requiring office attendance isn't the only answer to improving performance.
Exactly. If we link this back to the initial concerns about productivity, it suggests that investing in the skills and capabilities of the workforce might be just as if not more impactful than simply dictating a certain number of days spent in a physical office.
Let's think about how all of this actually impacts the public services that you as a listener might interact with.
Sure.
Lord Bellingham brought up HMRC as an example, noting their reported underperformance in answering phone calls during 2023-24. That's a concrete example of where potential challenges in service delivery could surface regardless of the underlying cause.
What's interesting to note is the government's own update, where they reported significant improvements in HMRC's call handling times and how quickly they're resolving issues more recently. This suggests that perhaps some of the initial challenges were being addressed, and it underscores how difficult it can be to draw firm conclusions based on data from a specific point in time.
Yeah.
However, the anecdote shared by Baroness Ludford, where an HMRC official working remotely couldn't access essential systems, does highlight potential practical challenges and the importance of having the right infrastructure in place for effective remote work in all roles. As someone trying to access public services, that kind of issue could be incredibly frustrating.
Absolutely. That kind of experience can really impact the public's trust and confidence. On the other hand, the discussions also mention the consolidation of the government's property holdings, with the sale of 1 Victoria Street being cited as an example of significant cost savings around £30 million annually, resulting from a more efficient use of office space due to the increase in hybrid working. So there are potential financial benefits for taxpayers that come with this shift.
And we shouldn't overlook the point raised by the Lord Bishop of St. Albans regarding the potential widening of the productivity gap between urban and rural areas, possibly made worse by increased homeworking and disparities in rural internet connectivity. The fact that they're even exploring local solutions like using church spires for antenna really emphasizes the need for tailored approaches that take into account regional differences and infrastructure limitations.
Finally, the discussions touched on a really key point for you to consider: the idea that different roles within the public sector likely have different optimal working arrangements. The distinction between, say, researchers or analysts whose work might be more individual and those in public-facing roles like at HMRC, the Passport Office, or the DVLA seems particularly relevant.
Right.
What makes one type of work effective remotely might not be the same for another.
This reinforces Lord Lounsborough's initial point about avoiding a one-size-fits-all approach. The fact that working from home has demonstrably improved access to employment for individuals with disabilities, as Baroness Thornton pointed out, also underscores the importance of offering flexible arrangements to meet the diverse needs of the workforce. And the government's emphasis on ongoing collaboration with trade unions on flexible working policies suggests an attempt to find a balanced way forward that considers the needs of both employers and employees in this evolving world of work.
So as you've heard in this deep dive, there are a lot of different angles to consider in this debate about working from home in the public sector: the drive for greater productivity, the ongoing questions about whether remote work helps or hinders that goal, the need for both in-person collaboration and flexible working options, and the very real consequences for the public services we all rely on and how effectively public money is being used.
What's evident from these parliamentary discussions is that this is far from a resolved issue. The government is actively reflecting on the evidence the House of Lords Select Committee is in the process of gathering further information, and significant differences in viewpoint persist among policymakers.
And for you, as someone who may be working remotely yourself or who interacts with these public services, these high-level debates have a direct impact on your daily life. By understanding the arguments being made in Parliament, you're better equipped to hold your elected officials accountable for the decisions they make regarding these crucial aspects of our society.
This leads to a really important question for you to think about. Based on the different perspectives and evidence presented today, what do you believe is the most effective approach to balancing the need for productivity, the well-being of public sector employees, and the delivery of high-quality public services in this evolving era of work? What specific questions do you still have after this deep dive that you might want to explore further?
That's all for today's deep dive. See you next time.
Bye.